3D printing is one of those hobbies that when you hear about it, it is immediately fascinating to learn about and raises questions about what the technology is capable of. I bought my first 3D printer at the beginning of 2021, starting an incredible journey that has culminated in me becoming a hobbyist turned profiteer. With 3D printing technology rapidly becoming cheaper and more available, almost anyone can get their hands on a 3D printer. Still, like the beginning of my own journey, there's a lot of information about 3D printing, but very little guidance on where to start for beginners. That is what I'd like to discuss in this video. Ideas of where to start, how to maintain and effectively use a 3D printer so that if you choose to walk this path, it will not be as hard as when I first started. At first glance, 3D printing can seem overly complicated, and trust me, it can be, but it can also be boiled down to a few simple steps anyone can follow. Finding a reputable website to download STL files is the first step. You can download these files from many websites, but not all of them are safe. The safest sites I use are websites like Thingiverse, Cults3D, CG Trader, and Printables. Thingiverse is a great site to find free 3D models, but the quality can vary. The other websites will have paid models that you can purchase, but will also have free models for you to download as well. Step 2 involves uploading your files into a slicer software, as an STL file isn't ready to be loaded into a 3D printer just yet. Cura is a slicer software that I use on a daily basis. AstroPrint is a website that emulates a slicer software in case your computer isn't strong enough to run the software. These slicers turn an STL file into G-code, a readable code that is like an instruction manual for the computer in a 3D printer to read by slicing the model into layers and telling the printer how these layers need to be done. Step 3 involves selecting the settings inside the slicer software. These will allow you to determine how long a print can take to finish and how much material is used during the process. By fiddling with these settings, you can determine how specific your printer will go about printing these items you've selected. As explained earlier, the 3D model is cut into slices, literally, and you can control how big and how filled in those slices are. Larger layer heights mean fewer layers and less material used, but lower layer heights mean more layers and more material used during the print. Step 4 is another thing to consider is that fewer layers mean a less detailed print and more layers mean a more detailed print. This shows the importance of fiddling with the settings while it's still in the slicer. You can control almost everything about how the print will turn out, increasing and decreasing the speed depending on the specs of your printer and the material used, and adding supports where you think they are needed because you can't print on thin air. Step 5, after a STL file is put through a slicer and turned into G-code, it can be loaded into a 3D printer via a micro SD card and the material preparation can begin. There are all sorts of materials that can be used in an FDM printer and each has its uses and quirks. PLA is by far the cheapest and easiest material to use with the lowest heating temperature required, but it is the weakest in terms of tensile strength. PETG is a tougher, more expensive material to use and needs a higher temperature to print correctly, but it is useful when you need the print to take some hits. Deciding what to use is based on what you intend the print to be used for. For hobbyists, PLA is mostly fine, but if you want to make car parts, you would need to use filament like nylon and polycarbonate, which are the most expensive and requires an enclosure to trap heat around the printer. Step 6 is where you need to inspect the 3D printer before starting it. Doing so lets you see what printer parts need maintenance before starting the print. Checking the nozzle to ensure it is seated properly or needs to be cleaned and or replaced. Another crucial part to check is the hot end to ensure it isn't leaking any currently loaded filament. Finally, checking the feeder to ensure it feeds the filament into the hot end is crucial. Step 7 is ensuring build plate adhesion to help keep your prints on the build plate. It's gonna sound weird, but glue sticks are your best friends when it comes to 3D printing. There are other methods to ensure build plate adhesion, but your everyday glue stick is the cheapest and easiest way to ensure that whatever you're printing stays on the plate. Step 8 involves leveling your build plate to ensure even layers and higher quality prints. Most 3D printers will have an auto leveling system that works decently, but underneath the printer are some knobs that can be adjusted before and during the print. Another method involves using a piece of paper and placing it between the nozzle and the plate, adjusting the height of both until the paper can move with just a bit of resistance. Step 9 involves keeping an eye out on your 3D printer as it prints. This is the most fun part of 3D printing, just watching the machine go layer by layer until it's done. However, that doesn't mean there is no real reason to watch it. Here is the part where you can adjust the build plate, ensure it prints out correctly, or stop the print if it begins to mess up due to poor plate adhesion or a clog in the nozzle. Step 10 is post-print cleanup, and then you're done. Depending on your settings and how level the plate is, or if you've added supports, this step is where human error can occur and ruin the print. I can't tell you how many prints I've broken because I messed up when removing supports or the print from the build plate. So this is the final crucial part in ensuring that you have successfully 3D printed something. This is not an extensive list of how to 3D print successfully. I could spend hours and not be close to telling you everything you need to know. But following these steps will help you get one step closer to becoming a 3D printing wizard. 3D printing can be intimidating, especially when looking at all the settings, software and hardware, materials and information that can be found online. But it can be boiled down to these simple steps. When I first started printing, I wanted to give up because I had no one to help me and I didn't know where to start. These tips are what I wished somebody had told me when I first started. And these are the words I'd tell somebody just starting on their own. No matter how intimidating or complicated 3D printing can be, I believe it is worth getting into, even if it's not for profits. As a hobby, it is one of my favorite things to work on because once I get my hands on the thing I spent hours working on, I get this elation seeing it finally done. Furthermore, the sense of satisfaction when you get to figure out a problem that has caused multiple failures is like nothing else. Not once have I ever regretted getting into 3D printing, and I highly recommend it to anyone for a fun hobby or for profit if you're lucky enough.